As I climbed the creaky stairs to the attic of our new home, dust motes danced in the beams of sunlight streaming through the small window. The air was thick with the scent of aged wood and forgotten memories. My heart raced with anticipation. I loved exploring, and this attic felt like an undiscovered treasure trove. "Lucas, come on. There's got to be something cool up here," I called, turning back to see my younger brother trailing behind me, his face scrunched up in that familiar mixture of excitement and apprehension. "Do we have to?" "It looks kind of spooky," he replied, shuffling his feet on the wooden floor. I chuckled. "It's just an attic, Lucas. Just think of all the old toys and books we might find. Besides, you're not scared of a little dust, are you?" He rolled his eyes, but I could see the flicker of curiosity spark within him. With a reluctant nod, he joined me, and together we pushed open the heavy door, stepping into the dimly lit space cluttered with boxes and cobwebs. "Sophie, get up here," I shouted, knowing my little sister wouldn't want to miss out on the adventure. A moment later, she appeared, her pigtails bouncing as she rushed to join us, her eyes wide with wonder. "What are we looking for?" she asked, her voice a melody of excitement. "Anything cool. Just look around," I exclaimed, already rummaging through a box filled with old clothes. As I tossed aside a moth-eaten dress, something caught my eye at the far end of the attic. "Hey, what's that?" I pointed towards a dusty corner, where a large trunk was half hidden behind stacks of cardboard boxes. Intrigued, I made my way over, brushing away layers of dust and grime. "Help me with this," I said, motioning for Lucas and Sophie to join me. Together, we pried the trunk open, revealing a collection of old dolls, their porcelain faces cracked and their clothes faded. But one doll stood out among the rest. "Wow, look at this one," I exclaimed, lifting it into the light. It was an antique doll with deep brown eyes that seemed to glimmer with an unsettling life of their own. Its hair was a tangled mess, and its dress was a delicate shade of blue, frayed at the edges. "Ew, it's creepy," Lucas said, taking a step back. "Creepy or not, it's kind of beautiful," I insisted, running my fingers along its delicate features. "What do you think, Sophie?" She reached out hesitantly, her small fingers brushing against the doll's cheek. "I think it looks like it could be magic," she said, her imagination already running wild. Just then, a chill ran down my spine as I felt the doll's gaze follow me like a spotlight. I quickly shook off the feeling. "Let's clean her up. She can be our new friend." Back in the living room, I sat on the floor with the doll in my lap. "I'm going to call her Annie." "Annie? Like the musical?" Lucas teased, his skepticism apparent. "Exactly. But this Annie is way cooler," I replied, giggling as I carefully wiped the dust off her face with a cloth. "Just don't let it talk to us at night," Lucas said, crossing his arms, his expression still wary. "Don't be silly. It's just a doll." "It can't talk," I said, though a small part of me wondered if he might be right. "Can we put her in my room? Please?" Sophie begged, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I hesitated for a moment, glancing at Lucas, who looked unconvinced. "Why not? It'll be fun to have her around." "Fine," Lucas said, rolling his eyes again. "But if she starts moving around by herself, I'm out of here." Sophie squealed with delight as we placed Annie on the shelf above her bed. "She'll keep us safe," she declared, her voice full of innocence. As we all settled down for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that Annie was watching us. The way her eyes glimmered in the dim light made my skin prickle, but I brushed it off, convincing myself I was just being silly. "Good night, Annie," Sophie chirped, climbing into bed. "Sleep tight, don't let the bedbugs bite," I added, trying to lighten the mood. But as I turned off the light and crawled under my covers, I couldn't help but steal one last glance at the doll. Her smile seemed almost too wide in the darkness, and for a moment, I felt a wave of unease wash over me. "Everything's fine," I whispered to myself, shutting my eyes tightly. "It's just a doll." But as I drifted off to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. That night, I was jolted awake by a sound that sent chills racing down my spine. It was a whisper, soft but clear, echoing in the stillness of the room. Sarah. I sat up in bed, heart pounding as I glanced around. My eyes darted toward Sophie, who was sleeping soundly, her face peaceful. But there it was again, the whisper, this time more insistent. Sarah. I swallowed hard, my throat dry. Sophie? I called out, but she didn't stir. My gaze shifted to the doll perched on the shelf. Annie seemed to have shifted slightly, her head tilted as if she were looking right at me. I blinked, convinced I was imagining things. This is ridiculous, I thought, shaking my head. I lay back down, pulling the covers up to my chin, trying to convince myself that it was just a dream. But the whisper came again, and this time, it felt like a cold breeze brushed past me. Sarah. I shot up again, my heart racing. What do you want? I demanded, my voice trembling. Silence filled the room, heavy and suffocating. I glanced at the clock, 2:03 a.m. The world outside was quiet, but I could still feel the presence of Annie, her dark eyes boring into me. Just a doll, I repeated under my breath, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. The next morning, I tried to shake off the unsettling feeling from the night before. I tiptoed into the kitchen, where Mom was preparing breakfast, the smell of pancakes filling the air. Morning, sweetheart. How did you sleep? She asked, her voice cheerful. Fine, I lied, forcing a smile. Just fine. Over breakfast, my mind wandered back to Annie, and I couldn't help but glance at the living room, where Sophie was playing with some blocks. Hey, Mom, do you know anything about the doll I found in the attic? I asked casually. She paused, a thoughtful expression crossing her face. Not really. I didn't see it when we moved in. Why? I don't know, it just feels different. Different how? She asked, raising an eyebrow. Like, I don't know if I trust it, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom chuckled lightly. Oh, Sarah, it's just a doll. You're letting your imagination get away with you. It's probably just old and needs some love. Yeah, maybe, I replied, though her words did little to ease my concerns. After breakfast, I went to check on Sophie and Lucas, finding them in the living room, surrounded by their toys. Hey, did you guys hear anything weird last night? Lucas shrugged, not looking up from his game. Nope. Just the TV. Sophie, however, looked up with wide eyes. I heard something. It was like a whisper. See? I'm not crazy. I exclaimed, excitement bubbling within me. Okay. Maybe it was just the wind, Lucas suggested, still unconvinced. Or maybe Annie is trying to tell us something. Sophie added, grinning mischievously. I rolled my eyes, but inside, a knot of anxiety tightened. Let's just keep an eye on her, okay? No one touch her unless I'm there. They both nodded, and for a moment, I felt a sense of camaraderie against whatever strange force was at play. But as the day wore on, my unease returned. I decided to take matters into my own hands. If Annie was going to be a part of our lives, I needed to know more about her. I grabbed my laptop and sat down at the kitchen table, typing in antique doll history. Hours passed as I scoured articles and forums, but I found nothing definitive about Annie. Just vague references to dolls being passed down through generations, some with creepy backstories. Sarah, what are you doing? Mom asked, peeking over my shoulder. Just researching about Annie, I replied, my fingers flying across the keyboard. Did you find anything interesting? She asked, genuinely curious. Not really. Just some creepy stories, I said, trying to keep my voice casual. Well, you know what they say, don't believe everything you read, she advised, giving me a reassuring smile. I nodded but couldn't shake the feeling that Annie was more than just an old doll. The creaking of the old house was almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat echoing through the empty halls. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to shake off the lingering unease from our first night in this unfamiliar place. My brother Lucas was next to me, his breathing steady, but I could tell he was awake, too. "Did you hear that?" he whispered, his voice barely above a murmur. I turned my head, glancing at him through the dim light filtering in from the window. "Hear what?" He sat up, his eyes wide and glistening with a mix of curiosity and fear. It sounded like someone was talking. I swear I heard a voice. I pulled the covers up to my chin, feeling a chill run down my spine. "You're just imagining things. It's probably the wind or something." But even as I said it, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Just then, we both heard it, a faint whispering, like someone was trying to speak just outside the door. My heart raced, and I exchanged a glance with Lucas. "Did you hear that?" he asked again, his voice trembling now. "Yeah," I admitted, my throat suddenly dry. "Let's go check it out." We crept out of bed, our bare feet silent against the cool wooden floor. The hallway was dark, the shadows stretching ominously as we tiptoed toward the source of the sound. As we approached the door, the whispers grew louder, more distinct. "Annie. Annie," my stomach dropped. "That's the name of the doll," I said softly, trying to keep the tremor out of my voice. Lucas nodded, his face pale. "What do you think it wants?" Before I could respond, the whispers faded into silence. We stood frozen in front of the door, fear wrapping around us like a thick fog. "Maybe we should just go back to bed," I suggested, but deep down, I was just as curious as he was. "Let's see what's going on," he insisted, his voice gaining a bit more strength. Taking a deep breath, I pushed the door open, half expecting to find something lurking in the shadows. Instead, the hallway was empty, but the air felt charged, almost electric. "Maybe it was just a dream," I said, trying to convince myself. "Yeah, maybe," Lucas replied, but I could tell he didn't believe it either. We returned to our room, but sleep was elusive. The whispers haunted my thoughts, swirling around like a storm. I finally drifted off, only to be jolted awake hours later by a loud thump coming from the living room. "Did you hear that?" I asked Lucas, who was now fully awake, his eyes wide with fear. "Yeah," he replied, his voice barely a whisper. "What was that?" We exchanged a look, and without a word, we climbed out of bed again. The living room was dark, but the moonlight spilled through the windows, casting eerie shadows across the furniture. As we crept down the hallway, I felt a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. "Maybe it's just Mom or Dad," Lucas suggested, trying to sound brave. "Or maybe it's Annie," I countered, my voice shaking. We entered the living room, our hearts pounding in sync. The thumping had stopped, replaced by an unsettling stillness. I scanned the room, my eyes landing on the corner where the doll had been placed, only it wasn't there anymore. "Where did it go?" I asked, panic rising in my chest. Lucas pointed toward the dining table. "Look." There, sitting upright on the table, was Annie, her eyes glinting in the moonlight. A chill ran down my spine. "How did she get there?" "I don't know," Lucas said, backing away slightly. "This is creepy, Sophie. I don't like it." "Me neither," I admitted, my heart racing. "We should tell Mom." As we turned to leave, I felt a strange compulsion to look back at the doll. The smile on her porcelain face seemed wider, almost mocking. I shivered, grabbing Lucas's hand, and we hurried back to our room. The next morning, I could still feel the lingering unease from the night before. I glanced at Lucas as we sat at the breakfast table with Mom and Dad. "Did you hear that noise last night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mom looked up from her coffee, her brow furrowing. "What noise?" "You know, the whispers and the thumping," I said, glancing at Lucas for backup. Dad chuckled, shaking his head. "Kids, it was probably just the house settling. Old houses make weird noises." "Yeah, but," Lucas started, but I squeezed his hand under the table, urging him to stay quiet. Mom smiled, oblivious to our unease. "You two just need to get used to this place. It has character." "Character," I muttered under my breath, my thoughts drifting back to the doll. After breakfast, I couldn't shake the feeling that Annie was somehow watching us. I glanced toward the hallway, half expecting to see her lurking there. Instead, I found my mom cleaning up the living room. "Mom, can we get rid of that doll?" I blurted out, the words tumbling out before I could think. She raised an eyebrow, surprised. "Why? I thought you liked her." "I don't know, she just gives me the creeps," I admitted. "Can't we throw her away?" Mom frowned, looking thoughtful. "I'll admit she is a bit unsettling, but I think she adds a special touch to the house. Besides, she's a piece of history." I wanted to argue, to tell her how wrong she was, but before I could say anything, I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. The toys that Lucas and I had left scattered on the floor were now arranged in a neat circle around the doll. "Mom, look!" I shouted, pointing. She turned, her eyes wide. "That's strange," she said, moving closer to inspect. "See? She's creepy." I insisted. Mom shook her head, dismissing my concerns. "It's just a coincidence, Sophie. Kids play with their toys and forget to put them away." But I knew it wasn't just that. I could feel a heaviness in the air, a sense that something was off. Later that day, I found myself wandering through the house, unable to shake the feeling of being watched. I decided to check on Annie again. As I approached the living room, I felt a cold draft brush past me, sending shivers down my spine. "Annie?" I called hesitantly, peeking around the corner. The doll was gone again. My heart raced as I searched the room. "Where are you?" I whispered, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. It was then that I heard it, the faintest of whispers, like a soft breeze carrying a secret. "Sophie, come play." I stumbled back, my breath hitching in my throat. "Lucas!" I yelled, my voice echoing through the house. "Come here." He appeared at my side, looking concerned. "What's wrong?" "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Hear what?" he replied, glancing around nervously. I opened my mouth to respond, but just as I did, the whisper stopped. It was as if the house itself had gone silent, holding its breath in anticipation. "I don't like this," Lucas said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Me neither," I admitted. "We need to tell Mom again. This isn't just our imagination." As we headed back towards the kitchen, I couldn't shake the feeling that Annie was somehow orchestrating this, her malevolent presence creeping into our lives like a shadow. When we found Mom, she was busy in the kitchen, preparing dinner. "Mom!" I exclaimed, urgency in my voice. "You have to listen to us." She turned, her expression softening. "What is it, sweetie?" "Annie, she's not just a doll. She's creepy, and she's moving around by herself." I blurted out, desperation creeping into my tone. Mom sighed, setting down the spoon she was holding. "Sophie, I understand you're scared, but it's just a doll. It can't move on its own." "But Mom, enough," she said gently but firmly. "I want you both to try and relax. This is a new home, and it's normal to feel a little unsettled at first. Just give it time." I felt a surge of frustration but held my tongue. Lucas and I exchanged a glance, our unspoken agreement clear: we had to take matters into our own hands. After dinner, we snuck out to the living room again, determined to find the doll. "Where do you think she went?" Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know," I replied, anxiety gnawing at me. "Maybe she's hiding." As we searched the room, I had a sinking feeling that we weren't alone. The whispering returned, barely audible, but it felt like it was right behind us. "Sophie!" "Lucas!" I turned suddenly, my heart racing as the night enveloped our new home. I found myself sitting at the kitchen table, the warm glow of the single overhead light flickering slightly. My hands were trembling slightly as I cradled a cup of tea, trying to shake off the unsettling feeling that had settled over me since we found Annie in the attic. I glanced at Mark, who was leaning against the counter with his arms crossed, his brow furrowed in thought. Sarah, I don't think we should keep that doll in the house, he finally said, breaking the heavy silence. Something about it just feels wrong. I sighed, taking a moment to gather my thoughts. I understand your concerns, Mark. But it's just a doll. It's a part of history, and the kids might learn something from it. I mean, look at how excited Lucas and Sophie were when they found it. They've been through so much with this move. Can't we at least give it a chance? His eyes narrowed slightly, and I could see the tension in his jaw. You didn't hear them last night, Sarah. They said they heard it talk. I don't know what kind of games they're playing, but it's not normal. I opened my mouth to respond, but just then, Lucas and Sophie burst into the kitchen, their faces flushed with excitement. Mom. Dad. You'll never believe what we found in the attic. Sophie exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with mischief. Annie. Lucas chimed in, bouncing on his toes. She's so cool. Can we play with her? I exchanged a glance with Mark, who looked even more concerned. Sure, sweetie, I said, putting on a brave face. Just be careful with her, okay? That night, as I tucked the kids into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I glanced at Annie, who was sitting on a chair in the corner of their room, her glassy eyes seemingly watching me. Good night, Annie, I whispered, forcing a smile. I turned off the light and closed the door, but sleep wouldn't come. Around midnight, I jolted awake to the sound of hushed whispers. I strained to hear, and my heart sank as I recognized the voices of my children. I rushed to their room, pushing the door open just enough to peek inside. There they were, sitting up in bed, wide-eyed and terrified. Mom, did you hear that? Lucas whispered, his voice trembling. Hear what, honey? I asked softly, stepping into the room, my heart racing. Sophie and I heard Annie talking, he said, glancing nervously towards the doll. She said she wants to play with us. Sophie whimpered, pulling the covers up to her chin. I don't want to play with her. She's scary. I knelt beside their bed, trying to comfort them. It's okay, sweethearts. It was probably just a dream. Dolls can't talk. You're safe. But as I looked toward the corner of the room, something strange happened. Annie seemed to have shifted slightly, her head tilted as if she were indeed watching us. I swallowed hard, forcing myself to look away. Why don't you two try to go back to sleep? I'll be right outside if you need me. I left the room, closing the door behind me, but the unease continued to gnaw at me. I headed to the living room, where Mark was sitting on the couch, deep in thought. Did you hear them? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Yeah, he replied, rubbing his temples. It's not just the kid's imagination, Sarah. There's something wrong with that doll. I felt a surge of frustration. It's just a doll. We can't let our fears dictate what we do. I'm going to look into its history. There's got to be a way to understand why it feels so unsettling. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. Just promise me you'll be careful. I don't like the energy in this house since we brought it in. The next day, I dove deep into researching Annie's origins. I spent hours at the local library, sifting through old newspaper clippings and town records. Every story I found painted a picture of a quaint little town steeped in history, but there were dark shadows lurking beneath the surface. Then, I stumbled upon an article that caught my eye. Mysterious disappearance of local artisan. The piece detailed the life of a woman named Clara, a talented doll maker who was beloved in the community. But then, one day, she vanished without a trace, leaving behind a collection of dolls, one of which was Annie. My heart raced as I read on. Rumors swirled around Clara's disappearance. Some claimed she had been practicing dark magic, others whispered that she had made a pact with malevolent forces. Could Annie be a vessel for something more sinister? I wondered, chills running down my spine. That evening, I rushed home, eager to share my findings with Mark. As I entered the house, the air felt thick, heavy with an unshakable tension. I found Mark in the living room, staring blankly at the wall. "Mark, I found something," I exclaimed, my voice filled with urgency. "Annie was made by a woman named Clara who disappeared. There are rumors about her practicing dark magic. This could explain everything." Mark turned to me, his eyes wide with concern. "Sarah, this is serious. We need to get rid of that thing. It's not just a doll, it's a conduit for something dark." I shook my head, feeling a mix of defiance and fear. "We can't just throw it away. It's part of our family now. We need to understand it. We need to know what we're dealing with." But as I spoke, I suddenly heard a soft giggle echoing from the children's room. My heart sank, and I rushed towards the sound, Mark close behind me. When we entered the room, Lucas and Sophie were sitting up in bed, their expressions a mix of fear and excitement. Annie was talking to us again, Sophie said, her eyes wide. "She said she wants us to come and play with her. Mom, Dad, she's really nice." Lucas chimed in, though I could see the fear lurking behind his smile. I felt a knot form in my stomach. "Guys, we need to talk about Annie. She's not just a toy. We need to be careful around her." "But she's our friend," Sophie protested, her voice rising. "She said she wants to help us." Mark stepped forward, taking a deep breath. "Listen, kids. I know you think she's your friend, but sometimes things aren't what they seem. We want to keep you safe." Lucas looked back and forth between us, confusion etched on his face. "But she's just a doll." I knelt beside them, swallowing hard. "I know it's hard to understand, but we need to listen to our instincts. If something feels wrong, we have to pay attention." That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Annie was somehow entwined with our lives, her presence growing stronger with each passing moment. I closed my eyes, hoping sleep would find me, but instead, I was plagued by nightmares. I saw flashes of Clara, her face twisted in sorrow, and Annie, her eyes glinting with something dark and sinister. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat, and stumbled into the hallway. As I walked toward the kitchen, I heard hushed voices coming from the children's room. Peeking in, I saw Lucas and Sophie huddled together, their faces pale and frightened. "Annie said she can help us. She wants us to be brave," Lucas whispered, clutching his sister's hand tightly. "Help us with what?" I asked, my voice breaking the tension in the room. "She said she can make our dreams come true," Sophie replied, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and fascination. I felt a wave of dread wash over me. "Kids, we need to talk about Annie. We can't let her control us." "Why not?" Lucas shot back, his voice rising. "She's our friend." I stepped forward, my heart racing. "What if she's not? What if she's lying to you?" Sophie looked at me, her small face filled with confusion. "But she's so nice." I took a deep breath, my mind racing with the implications of what I had learned about Annie and Clara. We need to be strong and not let fear take over. We have to be careful with what we believe. That night, as I lay in bed next to Mark, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were in over our heads. I turned to him, my voice barely above a whisper. What if Annie is more than just a doll? What if Clara's spirit is trapped inside her? What if she's been waiting for someone to set her free? Mark's eyes widened, and he sat up, his expression serious. "What do you mean?" "I found out about Clara's disappearance," I said, my heart racing as I recounted the details. "What if Annie is a vessel for her spirit? What if she's been trying to reach out to us for a reason?" Mark rubbed his temples, the weight of my words settling heavily in the air. "This is getting out of hand, Sarah. We need to figure out how to get rid of that doll before it's too late." I nodded, feeling the urgency of the situation. The attic was a labyrinth of forgotten treasures and dust-covered memories, and as I rummaged through the remnants of the Johnson family's past, a chill ran down my spine. I had spent the previous hours sorting through boxes, but it was only when I stumbled upon a delicate, antique doll that everything changed. Her name was Annie, as I would soon learn, and she possessed an unsettling gaze that seemed to pierce through my very soul. Sarah, come look at this. Lucas shouted from the far corner of the attic, his voice echoing in the stillness. What did you find, honey? I asked, dusting off my hands as I made my way over to him. Sophie, as always, was right at his side, her wide eyes sparkling with curiosity. As I approached, I saw the doll resting on an old trunk, its porcelain face glowing eerily in the dim light. What do you think? Lucas asked, tilting his head, his expression a mix of awe and trepidation. She's beautiful, I replied, though I felt a flicker of unease. The doll's eyes seemed to follow me as I moved closer. But kind of creepy, too, I added with a nervous laugh. She would look perfect in our room. Sophie exclaimed, her enthusiasm infectious. I couldn't help but smile at her excitement. Let's clean her up and see what we can do, I suggested, pulling the doll from the trunk. As I brushed the dust from her dress, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about Annie. Her smile seemed too wide, too knowing. That evening, after a long day of unpacking, I placed Annie on the shelf in the kids' room. I thought it would be a charming addition, a piece of history to spark their imaginations. Look at her. Isn't she lovely? I said, turning to Mark, who stood in the doorway with a skeptical expression. I don't know, Sarah. There's something about that doll that rubs me the wrong way, he replied, crossing his arms. It feels wrong. Oh, come on. It's just an old doll, I dismissed, wanting to focus on the joy it brought the children. Look how happy they are. Mark shook his head. I'm serious. You're not thinking about the stories behind these things, are you? Old dolls have a history, and often it's not a good one. I rolled my eyes. You're being superstitious. It's a harmless toy. But as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the sense of unease that Mark had voiced. I tried to push it aside, thinking it was just fatigue from the long day. I tucked the kids into bed, and as I turned off the light, I glanced back at Annie, now perched silently on the shelf. Her expression had shifted slightly in the low light, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The first night passed uneventfully, but the following evening, I was jolted awake by the sound of hushed whispers. I sat up in bed, heart racing, and strained to hear. The whispers were soft but insistent, like the rustling of leaves in a breeze. Mom, did you hear that? Lucas's voice broke the silence, and I could hear the tremor in his voice. Yeah, I did, I whispered back, glancing at Mark, who was already sitting up, his brow furrowed in concern. Sophie whimpered from her bed. I think Annie is talking, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Annie? I repeated, trying to keep my own fear at bay. It's just your imagination, sweetie. Dolls can't talk. But I heard her. She said my name. Lucas insisted, his eyes wide with terror. Okay, let's calm down, Mark said, his voice steady. We'll check it out together. We tiptoed into the kids' room, and as I flicked on the light, I was met with a sight that made my blood run cold. Toys were strewn across the floor, as if they had been played with during the night. It was as though the children had been awake the entire time, engaging in some silent game with the doll. See? Sophie pointed a shaky finger at Annie, who sat innocently on the shelf, her expression unchanged. She did it. Annie wouldn't hurt you, guys, I said, though I was beginning to doubt my own words. Maybe you just forgot to clean up before bed. But even as I said it, the memory of the whispers lingered in the air. The next morning, I found myself staring at Annie as I prepared breakfast, my mind racing with thoughts of what the children had experienced. I had a nagging feeling that there was more to this doll than met the eye. Determined to rid myself of my growing unease, I decided to throw the doll away. I marched into the kids' room, ready to dispose of Annie once and for all. But as I reached for her, I froze. The doll seemed to glimmer in the light, a soft smile playing on her lips, and a chill crept up my spine. Mom, don't! Sophie cried, her eyes wide with fear. She'll get mad. Why would she get mad? It's just a doll. I snapped, though I could feel my resolve crumbling. As I tossed the doll into the trash can, I felt a strange sensation wash over me, as if I was being watched. I left the room, shaking off the feeling. But when I returned just moments later to check on the trash, my stomach dropped. Annie was back on the shelf, smiling at me as if nothing had happened. "What the hell?" I muttered under my breath. "Mark." He quickly came to the room, his expression shifting from confusion to concern as he took in the scene. "You really threw her away?" "I did. I swear," I exclaimed, feeling the panic rise in my chest. "Maybe the kids moved her back," he suggested, though I could see the doubt in his eyes. Sophie shook her head. "We didn't. She came back by herself." "Enough with this," Mark said, trying to maintain a calm demeanor. "Let's just talk about this rationally." But even as he spoke, I could see the fear creeping into his eyes as he glanced at the doll. "I'll check the history of that thing," he said finally, his voice low. "There has to be some explanation for this." Later that day, as I cleaned up the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something sinister was at play. I decided to do a little digging of my own. After the kids went to bed, I settled down at my computer and started researching the doll. I pored over articles about local legends and folklore, trying to find any mention of Annie. Hours passed, and just as I was about to give up, I stumbled upon a small mention in an old newspaper article. It described a local artisan who crafted dolls and eventually disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The article hinted at rumors of dark magic and the possibility that her dolls were imbued with a malevolent spirit. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead as I read the words. "No, this can't be real," I muttered to myself, but deep down, I felt the truth settling into my bones. I hurried to find Mark, who was still in the living room. "Mark, I found something," I said breathlessly, clutching the printed article. "What is it?" he asked, looking up from his phone, his expression shifting from casual to serious immediately. I handed him the article, watching as he read the words. "Sarah, this is disturbing," he said, his voice growing heavy with concern. "You think this could be true?" "I don't know, but it feels like it is," I replied, desperation creeping into my voice. "The kids heard her talking. She's moving on her own. We need to understand what we're dealing with." Mark nodded slowly, his brows furrowing. "We need to be careful. If there's even a chance that this doll is tied to something dark, we have to protect the kids." That night, the atmosphere in our home shifted. As I lay in bed, sleep eluding me, I felt the weight of dread pressing down. The children's nightmares intensified, their cries echoing through the house. "Mom! Annie is calling us," they wailed, and my heart sank as I listened to their pleas. What had I brought into our home? I woke up the next morning feeling exhausted, but I couldn't ignore the need to uncover the truth. I found Mark already searching for more information, his face drawn with worry. "What do we do now?" he asked, looking up as I entered the room. "I think we need to confront this head-on," I replied, my voice steadying. "We need to find out if there's a way to break whatever hold she has over the kids." Mark nodded. "I agree. We need to dig deeper into the history of that doll and the artisan who made it. There might be something we can do to protect our family." With renewed determination, I began to piece together the fragments of Annie's past, ready to confront whatever darkness lay ahead. It was clear now that this was not just about a doll, it was about a force that threatened to unravel our very lives. I knew we had to act quickly before it was too late. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across our living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The air felt heavy, almost electric, as if it were charged with an unseen force. Lucas and Sophie had been unusually quiet since we brought Annie into our home, and the unease gnawed at my gut like a ravenous animal. I glanced at Mark, who sat on the edge of the couch, his brow furrowed in a mix of concern and disbelief. "Sarah," he began, his voice low, "I really think we need to get rid of that doll. There's something off about it." I opened my mouth to respond, but the words got stuck in my throat. How could I explain the odd comfort I found in Annie's presence? She was just a doll, an old, dusty relic of a time long gone. Surely, there was nothing to fear, right? But then again, the whispers that seemed to echo through the house last night were impossible to dismiss. I know it seems strange, but the kids love her. Can't we just give it a bit more time? I tried to reason, forcing a smile that I hoped would reassure him. Mark shook his head, and I could see the worry etched across his face. It's not just me, Sarah. They've been acting weird. You heard them last night, saying they heard her voice. This isn't normal. Just then, a soft giggle erupted from the hallway, and our hearts sank. Lucas and Sophie appeared, their faces flushed with excitement, but their eyes held a glimmer of something unsettling. Mom. Dad. Annie wants to play. Sophie exclaimed, her voice a mix of joy and something darker. Play? Mark echoed, skepticism dripping from his words. What do you mean she wants to play? She talks to us. Lucas chimed in, his eyes wide with delight. She has stories. Really cool ones. I felt a chill creep down my spine. Stories? I repeated, my voice wavering. What kind of stories? Sophie hopped from one foot to the other. The kind that makes you feel all tingly inside. She told us about her old home and the little girl who used to play with her. Mark shot me a look, a question hanging between us. How could a doll tell stories? Kids, it's just a doll, I said, trying to sound more convincing than I felt. Let's just keep it to a minimum, okay? But deep down, I was beginning to wonder if I had made a grave mistake. Later that evening, as we tucked them into bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that Annie was watching us. I caught her gaze, those lifeless eyes that seemed to twinkle with a cruel sense of amusement, and I shivered. As night fell, I heard the sounds that had haunted my dreams. Whispers, faint yet insistent, floated through the air like fragile tendrils reaching for me. I lay awake, my heart pounding, listening to the soft murmurs that seemed to call out from the darkness. Sarah, Mark whispered, breaking the silence. Did you hear that? Yes, I admitted, my voice trembling. What do you think it is? Probably just the wind, he replied, though his tone lacked conviction. But we both knew it was more than that. The next morning, I awoke to chaos. Toys were strewn across the floor, as if a whirlwind had swept through the room. I rushed to the children's room, my heart racing. Lucas? Sophie? I called out, but there was no response. I turned the corner, and there they were, sitting on the floor, surrounded by their dolls and action figures. What happened here? I asked, panic rising in my chest. Sophie looked up, her eyes wide and innocent. Annie wanted to play with us, Mom. She said we should have a tea party. Annie said? I repeated, feeling the weight of dread settle in my stomach. Kids, you know dolls can't talk, right? But she does. She really does. Lucas insisted, his voice rising in excitement. She's the best friend we ever had. I felt a knot tighten in my chest. No, this isn't right. We need to talk about this. As I began picking up toys, I noticed Annie sitting on the shelf, her smile unsettlingly wide. My resolve faltered as I approached her. There's nothing to be afraid of, right? I muttered to myself, forcing a smile. That day, I decided enough was enough. I couldn't let the children get caught up in whatever madness Annie was weaving around them. I grabbed a box and headed to the living room, determined to dispose of the doll once and for all. Mark. I'm getting rid of her, I called out, my voice firm. Thank God, he replied, relief washing over his features. But just as I reached for Annie, a strange sensation gripped my heart. I hesitated, staring into her glassy eyes. It was as if she were pleading with me, begging me not to abandon her. No! I snapped at myself, shaking my head. This is just a doll. I held her tightly, ready to toss her into the box, when suddenly, a soft giggle echoed through the room. Mommy, don't. Annie will be sad. Sophie's voice rang out, startling me. I turned, my heart racing. Sophie, you can't talk like that. She's just a doll. But she's our friend. Lucas piped in, his face a mixture of fear and defiance. Kids, listen to me, I said, my voice rising slightly. We cannot keep her. She's not safe. But before I could react, I felt a chill run through me, a sense of foreboding that made my skin crawl. I dropped Annie into the box and slammed the lid shut, but a whisper danced in my ear, you can't get rid of me that easily. I froze, my breath hitching in my throat. Did you hear that? I turned to Mark, my voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, his expression darkening. We need to talk to someone about this. There's something we're not understanding. Later that day, we sought out the locals who had lived in the area longer than us. The small town was full of folklore and stories, and we hoped someone could shed light on Annie's dark history. We entered a quaint coffee shop, the air thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee and baked goods. An elderly woman with sharp eyes and a knowing expression caught my attention. She sat alone at a corner table, knitting needles clicking rhythmically against each other. Can I help you? She asked, her voice steady and commanding. Yes, I replied, glancing at Mark for support. We moved here recently and found an old doll in our house. Her name is Annie, and strange things have been happening since we brought her home. The woman's expression shifted, her needle pausing mid-stitch. Annie, you say, she murmured. You're not the first to speak of her. What do you mean? Mark leaned forward, intrigued. Annie was created by a local artisan long ago. She poured her heart and soul into that doll, but something went wrong. The woman's eyes darkened. The artisan disappeared, and rumors say Annie became a vessel, a receptacle of sorts for dark forces. I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. What do you mean by dark forces? The woman glanced around, ensuring no one else was listening. They say Annie has a history of possessing children. She feeds off their fears, drawing them in until they're lost to her. I shuddered, the weight of her words settling heavily in my chest. Is there any way to stop her? The woman leaned closer, her voice barely above a whisper. There is a ritual, but it requires strength and belief. You must confront the darkness within your family first. If you don't, Annie will only grow stronger. My heart raced as the reality of our situation sank in. I glanced at Mark, who looked just as shaken as I felt. We'll do it, I said firmly, determination flooding my veins. We'll confront whatever darkness is in our home. As we left the coffee shop, I felt the burden of dread grow heavier on my shoulders. Lucas and Sophie were depending on us, and I couldn't let them down. But that night, as we tucked the kids in once more, I noticed something was off. Lucas and Sophie were quieter than usual, their eyes glazed over as they stared at the ceiling. Are you two okay? Mark asked, concern lacing his voice. Annie is talking to us, Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible. Talking? I repeated, my heart racing. What is she saying? She says we should be happy. She wants to play with us forever, Lucas replied, his tone eerie and distant. No. I snapped, my voice rising. You can't listen to her. She's not your friend. As I turned to leave, a sudden chill gripped the room, and I felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over me. Annie says you're scared, Sophie said, her voice eerily calm. Stop it. You're not listening to her, you hear me? I shouted, panic setting in. But as I turned to face the door, I could have sworn I heard Annie's laughter echo. The atmosphere in our home felt thick, heavy with dread. It was as if the very walls were closing in around us, each creak and groan echoing the tension that had settled in our hearts. I stood in the dimly lit living room, surrounded by our small group of neighbors who had gathered to perform the ritual to confront Annie. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows that danced across the walls, illuminating the faces of my husband, Mark, and our children, Lucas and Sophie, who sat huddled together on the floor. Are you sure we're ready for this? Mark whispered, his voice barely audible over the unsettling quiet. I could see the worry etched on his face, the way he clenched his fists at his sides. He had always been the practical one, the skeptic, and in the back of my mind, I wondered if he truly believed that we could confront the darkness that had seeped into our lives through that cursed doll. "We have to be," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "If we don't do this, Annie will keep tormenting us. She's already taken so much from us." My heart ached at the thought of what our children had been through, the nightmares, the whispers in the night. Just the other evening, I had found them huddled together in the darkness, their eyes wide with terror as they claimed to hear Annie calling them. It made me shiver just to recall their frightened faces. As we prepared for the ritual, I could feel a chill in the air, a shudder that coursed through me. The group of neighbors we had gathered were all faces I recognized, but never truly knew. There was Mrs. Henderson, an elderly woman with a kind smile who had brought a collection of herbs and candles, Mr. Thompson, a burly man with a deep voice who had shared his own stories of hauntings, and Clara, a young woman who seemed to carry an aura of strength despite her petite frame. They looked to me for guidance, but I felt as lost as the rest of them. "We should form a circle," Clara suggested, her voice steady. "It'll help us focus our energy and intentions." Mark nodded, and we all moved to form a circle in the center of the living room, the flickering candles positioned between us. As I looked at my family, I felt a surge of love and determination. "We're going to break this curse," I declared, trying to instill some semblance of hope. "We're going to free Annie's spirit and protect our family." As we began to chant the words we had learned from the ancient texts, I could feel a palpable energy building in the room. The air crackled around us, and I closed my eyes, trying to focus. Suddenly, a gust of wind whipped through the house, extinguishing the candles for a brief moment. The darkness felt alive, as if it were breathing around us. "Did you see that?" Lucas exclaimed, his voice trembling. "It's Annie. She's here." "Stay calm, Lucas," Mark said, reaching out to squeeze our son's shoulder. "We can do this together." But as the words continued to flow from our lips, the temperature in the room dropped even further, and I felt a prickling sensation crawl up my spine. The whispers began, soft at first, like a gentle breeze, but slowly growing louder until they echoed around us. "You can't save them," a voice hissed, slithering through the air. "They belong to me." Panic surged within me, but I fought to stay grounded. "Ignore her," I urged the group, my heart racing. "Focus on the light, on our love." The whispers intensified, morphing into high-pitched laughter that reverberated through the room. I could see the flicker of fear in Clara's eyes, and I felt my own resolve wavering. "What if this doesn't work?" she whispered, glancing around as if expecting something to leap out from the shadows. "What if we're making it worse?" "Don't think like that," Mrs. Henderson interjected, her voice filled with conviction. "We have to believe in the power of our unity. Annie thrives on fear, we cannot give it to her." Just then, the sound of shattering glass echoed from the kitchen, startling us all. "What was that?" Sophie cried, her small hands gripping Lucas's arm tightly. "Stay together," I shouted, feeling a wave of protectiveness wash over me. "Don't let her separate us." But as I glanced around, I noticed that the room had become chaotic. Books were flying off the shelves, and the wind had picked up, swirling around us like a tornado. "It's trying to break us apart," Mark shouted, his voice barely carrying over the cacophony. "We need to hold on." "I can't do it," Clara began, her voice choked with fear, but I reached out, grabbing her hand. "Focus on the love we have for our families," I pleaded, looking deep into her eyes. "We're stronger together." With renewed determination, we all closed our eyes and concentrated on the positive memories we shared, the laughter, the warmth, the moments that made us feel whole. I thought of Lucas's first day of school, his beaming smile as he ran towards me, and Sophie's sweet giggles as she played with her dolls. I thought of Mark's comforting embrace when I had a terrible day, and the way his laughter filled our home with joy. But Annie wasn't finished with us yet. The whispers transformed into screams, clawing at my mind. "You're weak. You'll never win." The voice was a mix of agony and rage, and I could feel it wrapping around me like a vice, squeezing the air from my lungs. "Keep going," Mark shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Remember what we're fighting for." I felt a flicker of hope ignite within me. "Annie, you don't own us," I shouted, my voice rising above the noise. "We are a family, and our love is stronger than your darkness." In response, the room shook violently, and I stumbled, almost losing my footing. The laughter turned into a terrifying roar, echoing in my ears. I could feel the energy shifting, as if the very essence of the house was twisting under the pressure. "Hold on," Mark urged, pulling me closer to him and the kids. "We need to link our hands, form a barrier." We all reached for one another, our fingers intertwining, creating a web of connection that felt electric. "We won't let you take our children," I yelled, my heart pounding as I felt the power of our unity surge around us. Suddenly, a blinding flash illuminated the room, and for a split second, I saw her, Annie, standing in the corner, her eyes glowing with a malevolent light. "You think you can defeat me?" she taunted, her voice dripping with disdain. "I am eternal. I am fear." "No!" I screamed, forcing every ounce of strength I had into my voice. "You are nothing without our fear. We choose love." Just as I spoke those words, the energy in the room shifted again. I could feel the air growing thick, almost suffocating, as if it were fighting against us. "Fight it!" Clara shouted, her voice strained. "We are stronger than this." As we focused on our shared love, I recalled all the moments that had brought us together, the family dinners, the vacations, the quiet nights spent reading together. Each memory fueled our resolve, sending waves of warmth through our circle. The oppressive energy began to wane, and I could see the shadows retreating from the edges of the room. But Annie wasn't done yet. With a burst of rage, she lunged forward, and I could sense her desperation. "You can't win. You will always be afraid." "No!" I shouted, my voice resonating with authority. "We refuse to be afraid." In that moment, I felt a connection to something greater, a force of love and unity that was stronger than any darkness. I squeezed my family's hands tighter, feeling their warmth and strength surrounding me. "We stand together," I declared, my voice rising above the chaos. The room echoed with our united voices, and as we chanted once more, I could feel Annie's power beginning to unravel. The shadows that had once loomed over us began to dissipate, and the laughter turned into shrieks of frustration. "No! You can't do this!" But we could. And we would. With every ounce of love and determination, we pushed back against the darkness, refusing to let it consume us. The shadows writhed and twisted, but we stood firm, our hearts beating as one, ready to face whatever lay ahead. The air was thick with tension as we gathered in our living room, the flickering candlelight casting eerie shadows on the walls. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing the fear that had been building since we found Annie in the attic. Mark stood beside me, his brow furrowed with worry, and I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "Are we really going to go through with this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if it doesn't work? What if we're just making things worse?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "We have to try, Mark. We can't let her keep controlling our lives. She's already affected the kids. We need to protect them." Mark nodded, but I could see the doubt still lingering in his mind. I couldn't blame him, I felt it too. Ever since Annie had come into our home, strange things had been happening. The whispers in the night, the toys scattered across the floor, and the way the kids had started acting. It was as if something had wrapped its tendrils around their minds, pulling them into a darkness that I couldn't understand. "Let's just focus on the ritual," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "We can do this together." As we gathered the supplies we needed for the ritual, a few candles, some salt, and a small bowl of water, I felt a strange sense of determination wash over me. If Annie was indeed a vessel for something malevolent, then we needed to confront that darkness head-on. "Do you remember the stories the old lady told us?" Mark asked, his voice steadying. about how she was trapped in that doll? Maybe we can free her too. Maybe, I replied, but deep down, I felt that Annie was much more than just a trapped spirit. She was a manifestation of our deepest fears, our insecurities. She thrived on the darkness in our hearts, and if we didn't confront that, we might not stand a chance. We lit the candles, the flames flickering violently as if they sensed the tension in the room. I glanced at the door, half expecting Annie to come sauntering in with her unsettling smile, but nothing happened. The silence felt unnerving, as if the house itself was holding its breath. "Let's hold hands," I suggested, and Mark took my hand, his grip firm and reassuring. I called for Lucas and Sophie, who had been playing quietly in their room, oblivious to the weight of the situation. "Kids, come here," I called, trying to keep my voice steady. They appeared at the doorway, their faces lit by the warm glow of the candles. Lucas looked curious, while Sophie's brow was furrowed in confusion. "What's going on, Mom?" Lucas asked, glancing between me and Mark. "We're going to do something important," I said, kneeling down to their level. "We need your help to make sure Annie doesn't hurt anyone anymore. Can you help us?" Both kids nodded, though I noticed Sophie's eyes darting nervously to the doll, which sat across the room, watching us. "Stay close to us," I instructed, and they joined hands with me and Mark, forming a circle of unity. I could feel the warmth of their small hands in mine, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that we could face whatever Annie was. "Okay, everyone," I said, my voice steadying. "We're going to focus on love and protection. We need to remind ourselves that we're a family, and we're stronger together." As we began the ritual, I felt the air grow colder. The candles flickered more violently, and I could hear whispers, soft at first, then rising in intensity. It was as if the house itself was alive, aware of what we were trying to do. "Annie, we know you're here," I said, my voice firm. "We're not afraid of you. You don't control us. We love each other, and that love is stronger than any fear you can create." The whispers grew louder, turning into a cacophony of laughter and taunts. I could feel Mark's grip tightening around my hand, and I glanced at him. His face was pale, but his eyes were filled with determination. "Don't listen to her," he said, his voice low but steady. "We're not afraid of you. We're here to protect our family." As we continued, I could see the shadows in the room growing darker, swirling around us like a storm. The candles flickered ominously, and I could feel the atmosphere shifting, as if something was pushing against us, trying to break our circle. "Hold on," I shouted, feeling the pressure building around us. "Focus on the love we share. Think of the happiest moments we've had together." Images flooded my mind, Sophie's laughter when we played in the park, Lucas's beaming smile on his birthday, the warmth of family dinners around the table. I clung to those memories, pouring every ounce of love I had into the circle. "Remember those moments," I urged, and I could see the kids' expressions shift from fear to determination. They began to smile, their faces lighting up as they recalled our family's happiest times. "Mom, remember when we went camping?" Lucas chimed in, his voice breaking through the darkness. "That was so much fun." "Yes. And remember how we roasted marshmallows?" I said, feeling the warmth of their love flooding the room. "We laughed so much that night." Mark looked at me, and I could see the spark of hope in his eyes. "We're a family," he said, his voice resonating with strength. "And nothing can tear us apart." Suddenly, the shadows seemed to recoil, as if they were being pushed back by the light of our love. The whispers turned into shrieks, and I could feel the force of Annie's presence pushing against us, trying to break through our defenses. "Don't give in," I shouted, my voice rising above the chaos. "Remember why we're fighting. We're stronger than you, Annie." With that, I felt a surge of energy rising within me. It was as if the very essence of our family was radiating outwards, pushing back against the darkness. The shadows began to retreat, and I could see the flickering candles steadying, the light becoming brighter. "Keep going," Mark urged, his voice filled with determination. "We can do this." I could feel the fear melting away, replaced by a fierce resolve. We were united, and Annie's power was waning. I could see the doll across the room, its smile twisting into a grimace as if it was realizing it was losing control. "Annie, you can't have our family," I cried, pouring all of my love and determination into those words. "We won't let you." In that moment, I felt a shift in the air. The whispers turned into howls, and the darkness seemed to shatter around us. The room was filled with a blinding light, and I could see Annie's form flickering as if she were being pulled apart by the very energy we were creating. "Keep holding hands," I yelled to the kids, feeling their tiny grips tighten around mine and Mark's. We were a fortress of love, standing firm against the tide of darkness. But then, in an instant, a wave of darkness surged towards us, crashing against our barrier. I felt the force trying to pull me away from my family, and I instinctively tightened my grip on Mark and the kids. "Don't let go," I shouted, my voice filled with desperation. "We can't let her win." I could feel the fear creeping back in, threatening to unravel everything we had built. "Mark, I don't know if I can hold on," I gasped, panic rising in my chest. Mark turned to me, his eyes fierce and unwavering. "You can do this, Sarah. We can do this. Remember the love we share. Remember why we're fighting." His words ignited a fire within me, and I took a deep breath, channeling all my love for my family into that moment. "You're right," I said, my voice steadier now. "We're stronger than this." Together, we pushed back against the darkness, our love forming an impenetrable shield. I could feel the energy surging through us, magnifying with every shared memory and every loving thought. "Annie, you don't belong here," I shouted, my voice echoing through the room. "We are a family, and you will not tear us apart." The shadows writhed and twisted, battling against our united front. I could see the flickering of the candles, their flames dancing wildly, but they burned brighter with our resolve. "Hold on," Mark urged, and I could see the determination in his eyes. I glanced at Lucas and Sophie, who were holding on with all their might, their faces reflecting the same fierce love that filled my heart. And in that moment, I realized that we were not just fighting against Annie. We were fighting for each other, for the love that bound us together. The more we focused on that love, the weaker Annie became. With a final surge of energy, we pushed back against the darkness, and I could feel the force of Annie shattering under the weight of our love. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, and then, silence. The room was filled with light, and as the shadows faded away, I felt a sense of peace wash over us. The candles flickered gently, casting a warm glow on our faces. We did the shadows in our house felt thicker that night, as if the very walls were absorbing our fear. The air was heavy with tension, and it was clear that Annie, the doll that had invaded our lives, was feeding off the anxiety and dread that permeated our home. Lucas and Sophie had been acting strangely, and I could feel the weight of their unease pressing down on me. Mark and I had been trying to keep it together for their sake, but I could see the worry etched on his face, mirrored in my own. As we gathered in the living room, I could hear the faint whispers echoing from the corners of the house, almost like a taunt. I felt compelled to speak, to break the silence that hung over us like a storm cloud. "Mark, we need to confront this. I can feel it deep down. Annie is using our fears against us," I said, my voice quivering slightly. Mark rubbed the back of his neck, a familiar gesture of stress for him. "I know, Sarah. But how do we confront something that seems to know us so well? It's like she's inside our heads." His brow furrowed as he glanced toward the hallway where the doll had last been seen, a mix of anger and fear etched on his features. "I don't think it's just the doll, Mark. I think it's about us, our fears, our insecurities. We need to face them together," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. My heart raced as I considered the truth of my words. It was easier to focus on a tangible enemy like Annie than to confront the deeper issues lurking beneath the surface of our family. "What do you mean?" Mark asked, tilting his head slightly, his curiosity piqued. I took a deep breath, searching for the right words. "Remember when we moved here? We were excited, but I think we've both been carrying our baggage from the past. I've felt it, and I think it's affecting the kids, too. Our fears are manifesting into something terrifying, something we need to confront. Mark looked thoughtful, nodding slowly. Yeah, I guess I've been feeling it too. I've been worried about providing for us, especially after the move. What if I can't find a good job here? What if we made a mistake coming to this town? Exactly, I said, my voice growing stronger. And it's not just you. I felt so insecure about my role as a mother. I keep thinking, what if I'm not doing enough for Lucas and Sophie? What if I fail them? My words spilled out, revealing the doubts I'd been pushing aside. Sarah, you're an incredible mother. You've always put the kids first. It's just, this whole situation with the doll is making everything worse, Mark said, his eyes softening. But we can't let her win. We need to stand together. I felt a surge of determination as his words resonated with me. Yes. We need to show her that she can't control us. But we first have to acknowledge our fears and the scars they've left on us. Mark nodded, his expression serious. Let's do it then. We can't let our insecurities, or Annie, define us. What do you want to share first? I hesitated for a moment, feeling the weight of my confession pressing against my chest. I'll go first. I remember when I was a child, I was always worried about disappointing my parents. I felt like I could never live up to their expectations. They were always so focused on success, and I was scared that if I didn't achieve it, they wouldn't love me anymore. Sarah, Mark whispered, his eyes wide. I had no idea you felt that way. You've done so much to create a loving home for our kids. You're not your parents. I know that now. But sometimes, when I look at our kids, I still feel that fear creeping in. What if I fail them like I felt I failed my parents? I confessed, my voice shaky. What if they grow up feeling the same pressure? Mark reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. You're not failing them. You're doing your best. We both are. This fear, it's just a part of us. But we can't let it control our lives. I took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of his support. What about you? What scares you? He looked away for a moment, his expression becoming distant. I guess I've always been afraid of not being enough, especially for you and the kids. I've been on this constant treadmill of trying to provide. I worry that if I don't make enough money, if I can't keep us afloat, you'll find someone else who can. Mark, that's not true. I love you for who you are, not what you can provide, I said, my voice firm. We're a team, and we're in this together. I chose you because of the man you are, not because of your job. His eyes met mine, and I could see the relief wash over him. Thank you, Sarah. I needed to hear that. I've been carrying that fear with me for a long time, and it's exhausting. We need to let go of these burdens, I said, feeling a sense of clarity. If we keep holding onto them, Annie will continue to thrive on our fears. We need to break this cycle. As I spoke, I could feel the atmosphere in the room shifting. The whispers faded, replaced by a sense of solidarity between us. Let's do this together, I urged. Let's confront our fears and show Annie that we're stronger than she thinks. Mark nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. Yes, let's show her. We need to be united in this. We can't let her divide us. Just then, we heard a soft giggle from the hallway, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Do you hear that? I whispered, my heart racing. Mark nodded, his expression tense. Yeah. It's like she knows we're talking about her. Let's not give her the power, I said firmly, standing up straight. We need to stay focused on what we've just shared. Our love for each other is stronger than her influence. We took a moment to gather our thoughts, and I could feel the energy in the room shifting again. Let's remember the good times, I suggested, my mind racing with memories. What about that camping trip last summer? The one where we all sat around the fire, laughing and telling stories? Mark chuckled, a smile breaking through his tension. Yeah, and remember how Sophie insisted on roasting marshmallows until they were practically on fire? She thought they were gourmet like that. I laughed, the warmth of the memory wrapping around me like a comforting blanket. And Lucas kept trying to impress us with his magic tricks, but all he did was make the marshmallows stick together. Those were good times, Mark said, his smile widening. We need to hold on to those moments. They define us, not Annie. Exactly. Let's keep that in our hearts as we face her, I said, feeling more resolute. We have to remind ourselves that we are a family, and our bond is unbreakable. As we spoke, I could feel the shadows in the room starting to recede. It was as if Annie was losing her grip on us, unable to thrive on the love and laughter we were sharing. Together, we're stronger, I repeated softly, feeling the truth of it settle over me like a warm embrace. Mark took a deep breath, his gaze steady. Whatever happens next, we face it as a family. We confront Annie, and we do it together. With that, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. We were ready to take on whatever Annie threw our way, united in our love and determination. I knew that we had the strength to overcome her darkness, no matter how deep it ran. We were more than just a family, we were a force to be reckoned with. And together, we would find a way to break free from the chains of fear that had bound us for too long. As the night deepened, we gathered once more in the living room, the air thick with tension and anticipation. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows on the walls, and I could feel the weight of Annie's presence pressing down on us. My heart raced, and I could see the fear mirrored in Mark's eyes. We had tried everything, and yet Annie was still here, lurking in the corners of our lives, always just out of reach, but ever so present. Sarah, are you sure about this? Mark said, his voice a low murmur as he glanced nervously at the doll, now perched ominously on the mantel. It seemed to grin at us, as if mocking our every effort to rid ourselves of her. I don't know if we have any other choice, Mark, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. We need to confront this. We can't keep running from it. I could feel the weight of my own fears pressing down on me, and I knew that I had to face them, not just for me, but for our children too. We had learned from the townsfolk that Annie thrived on fear, on the insecurities that bubbled beneath the surface of our lives. It was as if she was a mirror, reflecting back our darkest thoughts and doubts. I looked at Mark, who had always been my rock, yet lately, I could see the cracks in his confidence. We need to focus on love, on our memories, and the strength we have as a family, I said, my voice gaining conviction. Mark nodded slowly, though his brow furrowed in concern. What if it doesn't work? What if she's too powerful? His eyes flicked towards the doll, the shadowy figure that had haunted our nights and disrupted our days. I could see the fear etched in his features, a fear I shared but was determined to overcome. We have to believe in each other, I insisted. We can't let her win. Let's think of the happy times we've had together. Remember when we took the kids to the lake last summer? The laughter, the splashes, the way Lucas caught that big fish? A small smile broke through Mark's worry as he recalled the memory. Yeah, he was so proud. And Sophie was squealing with joy, splashing water everywhere. His smile faded slightly, but I could see a flicker of hope in his eyes. And what about our wedding day? I pressed. The way you looked at me when I walked down the aisle? That was love, Mark. Pure and untainted. We can draw strength from that. He took a deep breath, seeming to gather his thoughts. You're right, Sarah. We've been so focused on the fear that we've forgotten the love. We can't let her control us anymore. He reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly as if to anchor himself. Okay, let's do this, he said, his voice firm now. Let's show her what we're made of. As we took our places in the living room, I could feel the kids watching us from the doorway, their expressions a mix of curiosity and fear. I turned to Lucas and Sophie, who stood wide-eyed, clutching each other's hands. It's okay, sweethearts, I said gently. We are going to take back our home. We need you to remember all the good times we've shared. Like when we built that huge fort in the living room? Sophie chimed in, her voice trembling but eager. Exactly. I said, my heart swelling with pride. And all those movie nights with popcorn and cozy blankets. Those are the memories we need to hold on to. We can do this together. Mark nodded, his confidence growing as he addressed the children. You both have to be brave. Remember, Annie can't hurt us if we stand together. We're stronger than she is. With that, we formed a circle in the living room, holding hands tightly. I could feel the warmth of my family surrounding me, a protective barrier against the darkness that lingered in the room. We closed our eyes, and I focused on the memories that brought us joy, the laughter, the love, the unity that had always defined us. Let's remember our happiest moments, I whispered, my heart racing as I began to speak. When we celebrated Sophie's birthday with that surprise party, the look on her face was priceless. Yes, Lucas shouted, his voice breaking through the tension. And when we went to the amusement park, that was awesome. Right, I encouraged, feeling the energy shift in the room. And the time we camped in the backyard, telling ghost stories while the stars twinkled above us. We were so happy. As we shared these moments, I could feel Annie's presence start to shift. The shadows in the room seemed to writhe, and I could hear faint whispers echoing through the air, but we pressed on, our voices rising in unison as we recalled more cherished memories. Remember the first time we took the kids to the beach? Mark added, his voice gaining strength. The way they ran into the waves, shrieking with joy? Sophie giggled, her fear momentarily forgotten. And we built the biggest sandcastle ever. Exactly, I said, my heart swelling. We are a family filled with love and joy. Annie can't take that away from us. The whispers grew louder, a cacophony of malevolent energy swirling around us, but we held strong. Mark squeezed my hand tighter, and I could feel the warmth radiating between us, a powerful force pushing back against the darkness. Let's keep going, Mark said, determination lacing his voice. Think of all the holidays, the traditions we've built together. Our family dinners, the way we all laugh and talk over each other. And the time we went camping in the mountains, I added, my heart racing as I remembered. The stars were so bright, and we roasted marshmallows by the fire. Yes. And we told scary stories. Lucas exclaimed, his voice full of excitement. Annie can't take our memories. I shouted, my voice ringing out. We are stronger than she is. We are family. As we continued to share our memories, I could see the shadows in the room begin to shift, swirling as if agitated by our united front. It was as if our love was a light, pushing back against the encroaching darkness that Annie had created. Focus on the love, focus on the joy, I urged, feeling the energy in the room shift again. Let it wash over you, let it fill you with strength. The whispers turned into a low growl, a desperate attempt to penetrate our bubble of love. I could feel Annie's presence growing more agitated, but we stood firm. Annie, I called out, my voice steady. You will not win. You do not belong here. You can't take our joy or our family. We will fight you with everything we have. The air crackled with energy, and I could see the doll trembling as we leaned into our memories, each one a shimmering thread of light that bound us together. I could almost feel Annie recoiling, her power waning as we embraced the love that had always been the foundation of our family. Remember the family road trips? Mark shouted, his voice breaking through the chaos. The sing-alongs in the car, the snacks, the games we played? Yes. Sophie cheered. And the time we got lost but found that awesome ice cream shop. Our voices merged, a symphony of love and laughter that filled the room and pushed back against the shadows. I could see the doll's smile falter, its once menacing grin fading into something less confident, less powerful. Annie, you are nothing but a reflection of our fears. I declared, my heart pounding. We are not afraid of you anymore. We are a family, and our love is stronger than whatever darkness you hold. In that moment, I could feel the energy shift dramatically. A bright light enveloped us, pushing back the shadows that had seeped into our lives for far too long. The whispers turned into a wail, a sound of desperation that seemed to echo off the walls. As I looked at Mark and the kids, I could see the determination in their eyes, the love that bound us together shining brightly. We were no longer just a family facing a doll. We were a united force, a beacon of light fighting against the darkness that threatened to consume us. With one last push, we focused all our love and happiness into a single thought. We were stronger together, and nothing could tear us apart. "Let's finish this," Mark shouted, his voice ringing with conviction. And as we all shouted in unison, "We are family." I could feel the very essence of Annie begin to unravel, her grip loosening as our combined love surged forward, breaking the darkness that had held us captive for so long. In that moment, I knew we had reclaimed our power. I stood in the dim light of our living room, the air thick with tension as the oppressive presence of Annie loomed over us. My heart raced, pounding in my chest like a drum echoing through a silent night. I could feel Mark's hand gripping mine tightly, our fingers intertwined in a desperate attempt to draw strength from one another. The shadows seemed to dance around us, flickering as if they were alive, and I could hear the soft, mocking laughter of the Bonica, a sound that sent chills racing down my spine. "Sarah, we have to face it," Mark said, his voice a low murmur, almost drowned out by the whispers that filled the room. "We can't let it control us any longer." "I know," I replied, my voice trembling as I looked into his eyes. "But how?" "It's feeding off our fears. What if we can't overcome them?" Mark took a deep breath, his brow furrowed in thought. "We have to confront what it's showing us. It's not just about the doll, it's about us, our insecurities, our pasts. It's using that against us." As if on cue, Annie's form flickered, and for a moment, I saw a twisted version of myself reflected in her porcelain face. A vision flooded my mind, my childhood fears, the moments I felt unloved or unseen. "No," I whispered, shaking my head fiercely. "You're not real. You're just a manifestation of my fears." Annie laughed, a sound that felt like ice creeping into my veins. "Oh, but I am real, Sarah. I am the fears you refuse to acknowledge, the darkness you hide from. You can't escape me." "Don't listen to it," Mark shouted, pulling me closer to him. "You are stronger than this. I believe in you, in us." I nodded, feeling a spark of determination ignite within me. "You're right," I said, my voice growing steadier. "We've faced so much already. I won't let you win, Annie. You're just a reflection of our fears, and we're not afraid anymore." Suddenly, the room darkened, and the laughter morphed into a cacophony of voices, each one echoing our deepest insecurities. "You're not good enough, Sarah. You'll never be happy. Mark doesn't truly love you." The accusations swirled around us, trying to penetrate our resolve. "Stop it," I screamed, clutching Mark's hand tighter. "You're wrong. We have love. We have each other." I felt the warmth of his presence, a shield against the shadows. "And we've faced our fears before. We can do it again." Mark's voice rose above the chaos. "Annie, you may have taken on many forms, but you can't take our love away from us. We're more than our fears, and we refuse to be your prisoners." The room trembled, and I could see the doll's form flicker, wavering as if our words were cutting through the darkness. "No, you can't," Annie shrieked, her voice rising in pitch, laced with rage and desperation. "I am your fear. I will always be with you." "Not anymore," I declared, feeling the energy shift around us. "You may have been a part of us, but we're reclaiming our power. We're breaking this cycle." The air crackled with electricity as we focused on our memories, the times when we felt joy and love. "Remember when we first brought Lucas home?" I asked, my voice rising with emotion. "The way we held him, how we promised to protect him." Mark's eyes sparkled with recognition. "And how we celebrated Sophie's first steps, cheering her on no matter how many times she fell." He turned to me, his expression fierce. "We've built a life together, full of love and laughter. You can't take that away." Annie's form began to distort, the shadows swirling around her like smoke. "You're lying to yourselves. You can't escape me. No, you're the one trapped." I shouted back, my heart racing with newfound courage. You're a reflection of our fears, not our reality. We are stronger than you. With a surge of determination, we began to chant, our voices merging into a powerful incantation of love and unity. We are whole. We are loved. We are free. The shadows writhed and twisted, and I could see Annie's face contoured in frustration. No. You can't do this. I won't let you. Mark and I held each other's gaze, our determination solidifying into an unbreakable bond. We will not be afraid. I shouted, my voice echoing through the darkness. We choose love over fear. Suddenly, the room erupted in light, and I felt a wave of warmth wash over us. The shadows recoiled, and Annie's form flickered, revealing the true shape trapped within, the artisan who had crafted the doll, her face twisted in anguish. Help me, she cried, her voice a mere whisper beneath the cacophony. I never meant to harm anyone. Your fears have been imprisoned as well, Mark said softly, his voice radiating compassion. You don't have to be a prisoner of this darkness any longer. In that moment, I realized Annie was not merely a vessel of malevolence, but a reflection of the artisan's own fears and regrets. You can be free, just like us, I urged, my heart aching for the soul trapped within. Let go of your pain. We can help you. The light enveloped us, and in a final surge of energy, we poured all of our love and compassion into the space. You deserve peace. We all do. I cried, feeling the power of our shared resolve. As the light intensified, I felt the weight of the darkness lift, the shadows dissipating like mist under the morning sun. I can't hold on any longer, the artisan whispered, her form shimmering with uncertainty. I'm scared. You don't have to be scared anymore, I whispered back, my heart swelling with empathy. We're here with you. You're not alone. With a final, resounding cry, the light burst forth, and the shadows shattered into a million fragments. The doll crumbled to dust, and the air filled with a sense of peace, a release from the grip of fear. As the dust settled, I found myself standing in our living room, Mark by my side, and the weight of the world lifted from our shoulders. The oppressive presence had vanished, leaving behind a serene calm. Did we? I began, disbelief washing over me. Mark nodded, tears of relief streaming down his face. We did it, Sarah. We faced our fears and freed ourselves. We're finally free. In that moment, I felt a warmth enveloping us, a sense of love that radiated from deep within our hearts. We had not just confronted a malevolent force, we had faced ourselves and emerged stronger, united in our love for one another. Lucas. Sophie. I called, my heart racing as I rushed toward the hallway. The children appeared at the door, their faces illuminated with curiosity and innocence. Mommy. Daddy. What happened? Sophie asked, her eyes wide with wonder. We faced something dark, but we overcame it together, I replied, pulling them into a tight embrace. And we're stronger than ever now. Lucas looked up at me, his eyes sparkling with understanding. So, Annie is gone? Yes, sweetheart, Mark said gently, ruffling Lucas's hair. We don't have to be afraid anymore. We've learned that love is more powerful than any fear. Sophie beamed, her smile infectious. Can we play now? I want to build a fort. Absolutely. I laughed, a sense of joy washing over me. Let's celebrate our victory. As we gathered in the living room, I could feel the warmth of our love enveloping us, a protective shield against the darkness we had faced. We were more than just a family, we were a team, bound by the strength of our love and the knowledge that we could conquer anything together. And as we played, laughter echoing through the halls of our home, I knew that we had emerged from the shadows, ready to embrace whatever life had in store for us. Together, we would face it all, hand in hand, heart to heart, unafraid.